Welcome to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You knew that because you're smart. You truly are. You're smart. It's also the name of the show. Welcome in on a happy Friday, a fantastic Friday. I don't know what else to call it these days. It really is a great time. It's a great time anytime I get to talk to you. We get to have fun over on YouTube, on Facebook, on X. I'm still trying to figure out why Elon Musk's X has decided that only premium accounts are allowed to live stream. So if you're watching right now on X, it's because you're over on my personal X at Joy on Broad. But you can find this show on YouTube at The Russ Joy Show. You can find the show on YouTube at Joy Media, that Joy Media LLC account. Remember, the black and white logo, not the guy from the Philippines. We're not the same person. We may look similar. We may have similar levels of charisma, but we are not the same person. Anyway, thank you for joining me today. There's a lot. Sometimes I have to admit, when I go to put things together, because I'm a one-man show, a one-man operation, there's no producer, there's no graphic designer, there's nobody who sets up this studio. By the way, I got some new equipment on Prime Day. Very excited. Going to roll that out hopefully next week, maybe a little bit later. But very crazy stuff when you're a one-man operation. I spent a lot of time last night because I was like, I'm going to try to tweak how we do thumbnails for this show because that's going to matter in the YouTube algorithm. And like someday it might, and I figured something out, but I realized that the way that I do thumbnails is just going to take too long. It was too long. And then I was sitting there last night because I'm a psycho and I don't care about politics at all until like we're very close to an election cycle. And then all of a sudden I become an absolute political junkie, which is weird because I don't particularly like either party, but I enjoy all of it. So I am just as here for the fallout from Donald Trump's speech last night as I was for earlier in the day when the rumor came out about an open convention. And because it's my show, at the end of the show, I'm going to offer some thoughts because I have to admit, for years, as a political junkie around election time, I have always wanted to see what an open convention would look like. We'll talk about that later on. And if that kind of stuff offends you, if you're like, I can't stick to sports, that's fine. It's my show. I do what I want. I'm like Cartman. I do what I want. We'll get there later, though. Again, it's an apolitical show, but I'm interested in things that are happening. So we'll get there a little bit later. But there are a lot of things happening in Philly sports and in national sports. Very exciting stuff. And if you looked at the thumbnail or if you looked at the description of the episode, you know what I'm talking about. We have the Sixers. Are they moving to Camden? That's apparently back in the possibility. Got Camden pushing. You got the whole state of New Jersey, the entire state, North Jersey, South Jersey, Central Jersey, if that's a thing. Depends on who you talk to in Jersey, I've learned. I don't know why there can't be Central Jersey, but whatever. Pushing for the Sixers to go to Camden. That's on today's docket. Cavan Sullivan became the youngest player in the history of all the American sports leagues, or at least all the major American sports leagues. Youngest player to ever play a professional game. Beats out Freddie Adu. We'll talk about what that means and whether or not I thought it was legit or not. We'll get there later. Patrick Vieira, apparently interested in the U.S. men's national team job. Pochettino, apparently interested in the men's national team job. De La Fuente, apparently interested in the national team job. Gareth Southgate, please no, apparently interested in the national team job. We'll get to that a little bit later as well. We got so much going on today. And by the way, if you're an Eagles fan, you're getting closer to training camp. We talked earlier this week about Jalen Hurts being left off of a list of the top 10 quarterbacks in the National Football League. If you haven't seen that episode, if you didn't check it out, make sure you go back. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And by all means, let me know what you think. I actually did a little bit more mulling over on it the last few days, and I'm even more resolute in the belief that he should have been on that top 10 over an Achilles torn Aaron Rodgers, probably over a Matt Stafford, certainly over a Dak Prescott. But that's for another day. But we are getting closer. You can start to feel some of the excitement in the air. You can start to feel the Eagles beat writers. They're getting their thumbs prepared for that play-by-play tweeting that they do at training camp that I hate so much. We're getting closer. We're almost there. But we are going to start today with a team that I happen to know a little bit about and that I know a lot of people who tune into this show are really interested in. And that is the Philadelphia Flyers. Why am I leading with the Flyers? Because something potentially big is underway Is it a free agent signing, Russ? No, it certainly is not. Do the Flyers have another former high draft pick that's prepared to walk away from the team? Not exactly, but sort of. The Philadelphia Flyers may be losing out on or are about to get into a very contentious battle with Alexei Kolosov. And it could get really ugly. And I fear that it might. So Alexei Kolosov, for those of you who were uninitiated or unaware, Alexei Kolosov is a goalie that is from Belarus, played in the KHL. He was playing for Dynamo Minsk. I even called it Dynamo. And at the end of last year, it was worked out that he was going to leave Dynamo Minsk and he was going to come stateside. At 22 years of age, he was going to come over to the U.S. and was going to likely go to the Phantoms, probably help them through their playoff stretch, get acclimated to the North American game, and then be in position that not very far down the line, perhaps even as early as the 24-25 season, could compete for, if not the starting job, certainly the backup job with your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers. And people got very excited. I could tell you that back when we were doing the Press Row show at home games, we would have people come up to us and say, what can you tell me about this Kolosov kid? What does he look like? Are we excited? Do we think that there's a chance he does something legit here? Do we think he's the real deal? Could he be our karmic payoff for losing Carter Hart? What are we looking at with Alexei Kolosov? And it was interesting because at the same exact time, you knew in the back of your mind, the Flyers had done a lot of things the previous offseason to prepare for what many considered the inevitability of losing Carter Hart to a legal situation, we'll call it, up in London, Ontario. The organization was prepared, just in case. We'll call it just in case. They drafted goalies. They brought in Cal Peterson. They had worked behind the scenes to try to figure out if there was a way to bring a Kolosov over. They had largely given up on Ivan Fedotov coming over. And then things changed. Last spring, for those of you who remember, Alexei Kolosov, the news breaks. He's going to leave Dynamo Minsk at the end of their season. He's going to come to Philadelphia / Lehigh Valley. And if he's not going to go straight to the Flyers, he's going to go to the Phantoms. He's going to back up. And that's going to be what's going to happen. Cal Peterson might have stayed up, or if Cal Peterson was going to go down, he would probably start for the Phantoms with more experience in the North American game. But your goal ultimately was get the young kid in, get him acclimated, make him feel appreciated or valued or something, and then go from there. Not long after the news broke that he was going to be coming stateside, he ran into a little bit of a visa issue. Visas can take a bit of time, and as we know, if you're a player, in order for you to get the visa to play in the U.S., there has to be some kind of documentation that shows there is a job waiting for you. You can't, if you're the Flyers, just reach out to the U.S. government and say, we think this guy might come over. There's a good chance Alexei Kolosov can come over at some point. Well, I don't know. When? Is it going to be this year? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be 3 years from now? Yeah. You can't do it with Matvei Mishkov. Like, they couldn't even say when they drafted him, hey, U.S. government, we believe that Matvei Mishkov is going to be ready to come play for your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers. So, not my town. I'm from Washington, D.C. Okay, fine. But they were, you can't just say, hey, eventually he's going to come over. You have to actually have a contract in hand. Okay, fine. So, Kolosov runs into this, slight issue, this visa waiting period. And out of nowhere, absolutely out of nowhere, the news breaks that Ivan Fedotov, the Russian goalie, the massive man, the Iron Giant, go over to shop.snowthegoalie.com and get your shirt, that the Iron Giant was on his way, that apparently the KHL, his team, and Fedotov and his agent had worked out his departure, which would clear the way for him to become a member of the Philadelphia Flyers. And it was something that no one saw coming because, in fairness, the last time the Flyers had tried to sign him and a picture came out of him wearing a Flyers hat signing a contract, well, he left practice one day and an unmarked van pulled up and he got in the back of it, and then his attorney or his agent or whatever couldn't really track him down for a while, and then it was, He's going to serve his military service. Thank you for your service, right? But like the idea was, oh, cool. This Russian goalie that everybody thought was going to be able to come in and play for this team was gone. Thank you, buddy. My son brings me a coffee. Thank you, bud. He's trying to wait. There you go. All right, out, go. Love you, bye. So the idea was that Ivan Fedotov was out of play because not only did he go to serve his military service, but then it came out that he had signed an extension, if you recall. And the IIHF, who have absolutely no real power, they're a governing entity for hockey, for international hockey. They have as much say over anything as I do. Okay? Largely useless. Mostly useless. The IIHF comes in and says, well, Fedotov can't go play for his team in the KHL. He has a binding contract with the Flyers. Goes through this whole process. What is ultimately worked out is the NHL says, all right, the ELC that he signed, like we're going to be able to put that contract on ice for a year while he was doing the military service. But then last year, he signs that contract with the Russian team and he plays, which costs a year, which is a legitimate problem if you're the Flyers. So we had all of this going on, right? Fedotov was off the table. Kolosov is like, all right, Carter Hart, bye-bye. Likely to never play for the Flyers again. Might never play for a team in the NHL again. Can't actually go off and play in Russia because he's got certain kinds of bad charges against him, very serious charges against him. Carter Hart's gone. Sam Erson's here. Cal Peterson stinks. He's here. So if you're Alexei Kolosov, at some point, the thought has to be, hey, I'm better than Cal Peterson. In fact, many players in the National Hockey League, the American Hockey League, the KHL, your brother's beer league team are better than Cal Peterson. But then they ran into a complication. Kolosov probably, and I'm not saying this from sourced info, like, you got to be clear. A lot of this is just speculation, but I think the tea leaves are there. We can read them. Kolosov likely looked at the scenario, looked at the situation with his agent and said, listen, this is a time to capitalize. There's not a true number one in Philly. I mean, hell, like half the fan base didn't know if Sam Ersson was actually a number one or not. So they probably looked at the situation and said, you are the best young goalie in the system at this point. Fedotov is out of play. Hart is out of play. This is the perfect opportunity. Strike while the iron's hot. Because there has to be a little bit of a calculation when you're a pro athlete, especially one who plays abroad, who is from abroad, who wants to eventually make it to the biggest league in the United States, the National Hockey League. There has to at least be a small part of you that says, I need to try to make some money here. Because there's no guarantee that I can play in the NHL. There's no guarantee I'm going to be a very good professional. But there are millions of dollars sitting out there. Potentially millions of dollars. Think of how life-changing $500,000 would be. Think of how life-changing to most people $1 million would be. And then consider for a second that he could have potentially come in here and gotten millions of dollars. Can you blame Alexei Kolosov if he looked at the situation and said, I'm going to leave Minsk. I'm going to come stateside. I'm going to try to make it onto the NHL team, right? Who, by the way, were in the midst of a very poorly decided playoff run. And maybe he said to himself, I'm going to go over there. I'm going to play for a bit and I'm going to earn myself a contract. Who could blame him? No one. No one can blame him. But then something happened. Fedotov, the news breaks. Fedotov is coming stateside. Termination of his contract in the KHL. He's coming to the States. And within a week, 10 days, he's stateside. He's got all new pads. He's breaking in all new pads. And hell, he got himself into the lineup. They didn't send him to the AHL. They brought him right in and made him the backup. They used that emergency goalie provision in the CBA that some other teams apparently squawked a little bit about. They sent Cal Peterson down, and Ivan Fedotov, the Iron Giant, became your backup. Meanwhile, Alexei Kolosov was like, well, wait a second. I just left the team that I like to play for in the KHL, Dynamo Minsk. I just left them to come over and play for you guys. Oh, what am I doing? So they send him down to Lehigh Valley, which is totally fair. And in fairness, if you're thinking about it, you're 22 years old. You've never played stateside. It stands to reason that there might be a little bit of a learning curve. You have to learn the American game. The rink size is a little bit different, and it does depend. Some KHL teams have moved to more of like what an NHL-sized rink is, but some still have the really wide rink. So there's an idea that you have to adjust. Maybe not as difficult to adjust as it used to be, but it's still a thing. Okay, fine. Kolosov comes over, and at some point when he was here, the word came out that he was uncomfortable, that there are no real Russian-speaking players on the team. He's backing up Cal Peterson, who sucks. He's backing up Cal Peterson in this playoff run. He doesn't know the language. He really doesn't have anyone here that makes him feel in any way, shape, or form truly comfortable. And that he might be homesick. That came out not long after he landed in the U.S. and kind of went through some of the motions with the Phantoms. And when that season ended, it became even louder that Alexei Kolosov might not want to play in Philadelphia. And then people got themselves in a tizzy. And I sat back and I said, I don't blame him. Like, think about, just for a second, I know we kind of like go in circles sometimes, but like lay out what your perfect scenario was if you were Alexei Kolosov and then the absolute shit show he walked into, okay? Before Fedotov, going into last season, Kolosov probably goes into the KHL year. He had been granted the opportunity to remain in the KHL to play another year because there really was nowhere for him on the Phantoms roster or the Flyers roster. Carter Hart, gone. Kolosov probably thinks, Fedotov is definitely off the table. Sam Ersson goes from being a 1A to a little bit of tenuous footing. Cal Peterson sucks. So the likelihood of Kolosov going, okay, I'm in about as good of a position as ever to make the jump, get paid millions of dollars, and either play and have a great career or just make millions of dollars. Could you blame him or his agent or his family for saying, yes, do that? And then within the course of a week, Fedotov jumps him, is already playing, is already suiting up, is already practicing with the Flyers. They send him to Lehigh Valley, which is certainly not Philly. Love the Lehigh Valley. Certainly not Philly. There are no Russian players. No one speaks the language. And he backs up Cal Peterson, who sucks. Does anybody actually feel like Alexei Kolosov is an asshole? There are people on Twitter who very much feel like it. I put out the tweet where I didn't say report or sources. I merely speculated, as I just did, that if you look at all the series of events, it stands to reason that Alexei Kolosov would be upset, and probably rightfully so, that what he envisioned as a potential multi-million-dollar opportunity and the chance to play in the National Hockey League got messed up. And then to take it another step further, Fedotov's contract was pretty big, all things considered. Remember, when he came over, he was still on the end of his ELC, and then the conversation immediately became, if you're the Flyers, are you trying to re-sign him? Are you trying to bring him back? And he got a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. So then Kolosov, who came over, had nobody to speak to in his native language, didn't get to play for the Phantoms in the playoffs, despite being told that he's part of the future, and now isn't going to get millions of dollars. Probably goes, what the fuck? Like, no, I'm going home to a place where I belong. Like, of course he wants to go back. He has a problem, though. And his problem is that he's under contract to the Flyers. He can't just go back to the KHL and say, I'm going back to Dynamo Minsk. That's not how this works. Now, is it possible? Could it happen that Dynamo Minsk does what Fedotov's team had done before and try to sign him to a KHL contract? Yeah, in theory, they could. And we've seen that the IIHF has no ability to enforce any of it. However, while the KHL and the NHL no longer have an agreement where you can buy out a guy's contract, and the front offices and the ownership aren't supposed to talk to each other, right? Like the whole thing with Mishkov and the whole thing with Fedotov is that the Flyers and the KHL team don't talk. It's the Flyers talking to the player's agent. The player's agent talks to the Russian team. The Russian team talks to the player's agent. Player's agent talks to the NHL team. Sure. They're not allowed to talk. Okay. Is it possible that a KHL team could say, we're going to sign him, screw the Flyers contract. We don't care about binding. It has no impact on us, whatever. Kolosov maybe says, I don't care. I don't need to represent Belarus in the Olympics at some point. Fine. I'm fine without IHF sanction. Maybe. However, the KHL, to their credit, have allowed players to work their way out of contracts to go play in the NHL, to buy themselves out of their contracts. It would appear on the surface, because the surface and what might actually be going on could be two different things, but it at least appears that on the surface, what could be happening is the KHL saying there are good business reasons for allowing players to leave for the U.S. It is entirely possible that the KHL would look at a team like Dynamo Minsk and say, no. You're not doing that. We're in a good place. We're in a good place getting players sent over to the NHL, buying themselves out of their contracts. There's definitely nothing going back to anybody. Sure. I don't think the KHL is going to want to mess with it. I truly don't. And I think that if Dynamo Minsk tried to circumvent the system and bring Kolosov back, it wouldn't go well. And I don't think they'd be allowed to. I want to get to the comments because there's so many comments about the situation. We'll come back to this and then we'll move on to some other stuff. Andrew and Joe Papel. These guys are like riding shotgun with me all the time. I appreciate them supporting everything that we do. It's very kind. Appreciate that. Let's see. Joe Papel asks, any word from Ant on Mishkov getting out of Russia? No, he's still in Russia right now. They were working on the visa. He can't come stateside until the visa is finalized. But for all intents and purposes, he'll be fine. He'll be here for camp. We knew that he wasn't going to be here for dev camp. As we know, visas can take a while. He'll be fine. He'll be here. Jay Grubby says, good morning. Sean C. says, I think the Kolosov thing falls at Loppy's feet. Ian LaPerriere, who for some reason is still the coach of the Phantoms. More than Briere. They bring him over here in March. He plays 2 games, pretty much rode the pine for 2 months. Add that on top of the homesickness. I agree. And at the same time, I think that as an organization, you have to have the conversation with an Ian LaPerriere. This guy needs to play. Now, obviously, they wanted to make a run to the playoffs in the AHL playoffs. And perhaps they decided that Cal Peterson was their best chance. That's just so stupid. But yeah, maybe they decided that Cal Peterson was the way to do it. That was the way to go. But I agree 100%. There is nothing worse. And this is where I come back to. Who can blame Kolosov if this is how he feels? If what I have outlined is what, in fact, has gone through his head, his agent's head, his family's head. Who could blame him for being homesick and wanting to leave? I did see, by the way, really quick. I saw somebody on Twitter. They responded to it that, oh, it's a shame that there aren't phones and there aren't ways to talk to people. We're talking about a totally different time zone. We are talking about a guy who doesn't speak the language of the country he's living in and doesn't have people on the team who speak the same language. It's one thing if Kolosov had made his way to the Flyers this year, where in training camp he would have both Mishkov and Fedotov. But that wasn't the case with the Phantoms. And I forget the guy's name. There was a guy that the Flyers acquired around the trade deadline who played a couple of games for them. We thought he was going to be somebody that they would look in a bottom 6 role. Had a good playoff run a few years ago. I genuinely forget the guy's name, but I believe he speaks Russian, and that was also part of it with Fedotov, was they wanted to have somebody who was going to be in town who would speak the language, because they valued that for Fedotov, but there was nobody with the Phantoms who could. So there was that. Let's see. Sean C. says, it's not comparable to that entitled loser from Boston College. 70-30, he stays in Belarus right now. The tricky thing, like I said, is I don't know how the contracts are going to work out. I just don't see a KHL allowing a team to sign the guy and get into a perfectly reasonable spat with an NHL team again. You've made inroads if you're the KHL. There's no point to blow that up now for Kolosov. We'll get back to that loser from Boston College later. Maybe. Joe Papel thinks that Kolosov expected to be the Flyers' backup till Fedotov signed. I totally agree. 100%. Andrew Fawcett said the kid was here for all of an hour. He didn't give enough time. Again, I think it's really, I think that people underrate how hard it is to go to a country you don't speak the language in, and that there is no one there who can support you in that way. If you study abroad, right? I studied abroad. I spoke the language, though. But I studied abroad in Berlin. All right, cool. That was a great time. It was a great time. But, I spoke the language. But even if I hadn't, Germany's full of English-speaking people. And the people who ran the school that I went to, they also spoke English. And a number of the international students who were also studying at that school spoke English. And the host family that I stayed with spoke to some extent, at least broken English. But that was still an adjustment. And at that time, I was 19. I was 19, about to be 20. I can't fathom uprooting my entire life, going somewhere where no one speaks the language. You have never been part of that culture. Culturally, Belarus and even Russia, very different than the United States. I can't imagine at 22 trying to do that. I can't. I actually feel for the guy. And if you choose not to, by the way, if you're out there and you're like, oh, this guy get paid a lot of money, there's a potential contract in play, screw him. You can have that opinion. I think you're wrong, but you can have that opinion. In fairness. Jay Grubby asks, is it possible for the Flyers to loan him out to Dynamo for the rest of his contract? That way he can still qualify, or they can qualify him and retain his rights. I think that they potentially could, but I believe that the contract that he had, right, was ended. It was terminated. And the Flyers allowed him to go back to the KHL for a year. They didn't have to do that. That time already counted against his ELC. I don't see why they would. I think that this is going to get really ugly. I'll get back to that in a second. And if I don't, somebody remind me in the comments about me saying that I think it's going to get ugly. But we'll talk about that in a second. Sean C. says, add Carter Hart's arrest to Cal Peterson and Felix Sandstrom not making a save at the NHL level, and you get the Flyers scrambling to get two international goalies over here ASAP. 100%. 100%. I think that they really did believe that Sam Ersson was going to slide in and be a number one. And I think that Sam Ersson does have the ability to be a number one. I don't think it's going to be that he'll be a top 5 goalie in the league. I think that he can be a starter in the NHL. And if you're a starter in the NHL, you're a top 30 goalie, right? So that is what it is. I think that he could be good, but I think that he was put in a position last year. Ersson, however the hell you want to say it. I'm going to keep going back and forth, by the way. I think that he was in a really tough spot because last year he was playing sensationally as the backup. The starter goes, you don't have a lot of time to adjust, and now all of a sudden you're being ridden as the lead horse. And I think that if he gets to go into the next season expecting to be the starter, which presumably he would, unless Fedotov had divine intervention, I think he'll be ready. I think he'll play really well. And by the way, I expect Fedotov to be exponentially better than he was in his limited run here at the end of last season. Let's see. Sean says, if Peterson and Sandstrom were at an 895 save percentage, I don't think they rushed Kolosov over at the end of Mink's season. I think it would have been a different situation if he was coming in September for the first time. That's where I agree. So if they had held off on bringing Kolosov over until the fall, he would have been in camp. They would have invited him to training camp. He would have had Fedotov here, and he would have had Mishkov here. There at least would have been a small group of guys who speak the language, who can kind of identify with one another, who have stories of playing in the KHL, who understand culturally what it was like to be there and this transition to the U.S. I do think it would have been a more beneficial situation. But I'm going to be honest with you. I think that when the Flyers brought Kolosov over, their intention was to send him to the A, get him to play a few games, and then bring him up and be the backup goalie. I truly do believe that. I don't think that their goal was to just send him to the AHL and have Cal Peterson up here. I don't. I really don't. Because all the things that I heard last year where we think that if he gets acclimated, he can play at the NHL level. And then as the wheels started to fall off later in the season, there was no conversation about them flip-flopping Kolosov and Fedotov, but it was kind of like, oh, shit. Like, if we hadn't brought Fedotov over in that situation, and as the wheels are falling off, you could have given Kolosov some starts in games that really didn't mean as much. I mean, to Torts and to the people who really thought that making the playoffs was truly important, they were important games. But to like normal people like me and many of you, we knew that the games didn't really matter. I saw a comment here about Jim Jackson's comments on Konecny's contract. We'll get there in a second as well. Wanted to see... There was more here. Let's go here. Jay Grabby, I'd love to see them have an open competition in camp for goalies this year. Give Kolosov a chance. If he beats out one of the other two, let him play. If he doesn't, loan him back to the AHL is a no-go. Okay. If they're being fair about this, right? If this team is truly in a rebuild, there are a few different ways you could go. I'm totally all in on the idea of letting the three guys, Ersson, Fedotov, and Kolosov, have an actual competition. There are two spots. There are three guys. In fairness, Ersson's getting paid a decent amount of money. Fedotov is definitely getting paid considerable money relative to his experience. And then Kolosov is in here pretty cheap. I'd say let them go and do what they're going to do in camp. Let them go through the preseason. Figure it out. In a really good scenario here, Ersson's your lead. He's your starter. Fedotov is your backup. Kolosov gets to play the full year in the AHL, is an absolute like stone cold killer, is a fantastic goalie for the Phantoms. And then you go into the 25-26 season saying, all right, where's Fedotov at? Do we look at potentially trading him and bringing Kolosov up? Do we see Sam Ersson regress in a real meaningful way? And then there's motion. The thing that you can't do if you're the Flyers is you can't get super rigid here. You can't be in a situation where it's like, all right, Ersson's definitely our number one. Fedotov is definitely our number two. We are not entertaining anything else. You're in a rebuild. Figure it out. Figure it out. There are other guys, by the way, in the pipeline who are going to be making their way stateside at some point and are probably going to be battling for spots with the Phantoms. At some point here, you have to see what Kolosov is. You have to see what Fedotov is going to be with a full season at the NHL level. And then you have to make your best decision. I know that there are people out there that are saying, hey, what about potentially trading Sam Ersson? I think that's insane. I think that when you have a guy who's proven he can be a number one or a 1A and have a really strong season, especially when called upon to play a role that no one expected him to, the idea of trading that guy away is pretty freaking crazy. To me, I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I could be. All right, let's see. There are a few other things here. I just want to see if there's anything that was worth getting to, because there was a question about Konecny, and I said that I think things are going to get ugly in a little bit. Andrew Fawcett asks, is it true that he missed his flight to come over? Apparently, they're working on getting his NHL contract terminated. I don't know. I don't believe the story that he missed his flight. There are many flights. The Flyers have a lot of money. I think that if he missed his flight and he's sitting at the terminal, that it's pretty easy to get him a new flight booked. So I just have a feeling that it's going to get pretty gross. Here's why I think it's going to get ugly. And this is the last thing before we get to the Konecny thing really quick, and then we move on to other teams, not the Flyers. It's going to get ugly for one reason and one reason only. The Flyers have gone out of their way to try to bring players over from the KHL with the expectation that they're going to fit into a role at the NHL level or potentially at the AHL level. They're going to play a role, and they're going to do what's asked of them, like they would with any player under contract. Fedotov came over, he's playing his role. Mishkov is coming over, he's going to play his role. Kolosov comes over, he's expected that if he's sent to the Phantoms, you're going to go down there and be a professional. And the fact that they allowed him to go back to Minsk for a year and burned a year of the ELC, they expected him to come over and do what he's supposed to do. So in their mind, Alexei Kolosov is under contract with the Flyers the same way that every other player who plays for the Flyers or the Phantoms are under contract with this organization. The mere notion that a player would try to leverage his way back home, whether it's being homesick or he's unhappy with the situation, and try to get his NHL contract terminated. That will not sit well with the Philadelphia Flyers. It will not. And what I very much expect to have happen is you are going to, over the next month and a half, you're going to see more reports about Kolosov being homesick and not wanting to be here. And the Flyers, who are under no legal obligation to allow him out of that contract, are going to try to hold him to that contract. They don't have to let him go back to the KHL. They don't have to loan him back. Now, if a KHL team decides to get themselves into the IIHF's radar again, they can. Again, I don't think it's going to happen. But the Flyers are under no obligation to do anything. And if Kolosov were to say, send me to a team that has an opening, the Flyers are under no legal obligation to send him somewhere else, to trade him away somewhere else. That's not how this works. I think it's going to get ugly. I really do. The best thing for the player would be for him to come stateside, go to training camp, be with other players who speak the language, be with other players, feel some camaraderie, and get himself established, and give him, perhaps as an organization, the notion that you're going to be our starter at the AHL level for a year, and then we will have an open and honest conversation about your role with the organization next year. But we need you to play stateside. We need to see what we have in you, and at the same time, we are evaluating both of the options at the NHL level. The Flyers should be married to none of these guys. None. None of them are generational talents. I do think Ersson's a really good goalie. He does not appear to be a generational talent. Fedotov is a massive human being who's a little bit older. He's 6 years older than Kolosov. He's not your long-term answer. He could be a really good backup potentially for you, but he's not the franchise netminder for the next 10 years. Kolosov has a path. The organization has to do a very good job of articulating that. Get the player into camp, and then let's see where it goes from there. That's what has to happen. Andrew Fawcett is recommending a cage match. I don't know if that's in play, but I still appreciate it. CT Landry, who's over on X. By the way, if you're watching on X and you've been trying to comment on the video and you haven't seen your comments pop up, you have to click on the video first and go into the old Periscope mode where you can see when people send hearts. If you comment in there, then I can see your tweets. If you only respond to the video on the timeline, it won't work. Anyway, CT Landry says, agree, let them have a competition. Hard to judge. Literally, no one has seen him play. That is true. That's where we're at. Now, there was a question that came up a little bit ago. This is also a good point here by M. Bodine. Not only is he dealing with a language barrier, it's a totally different alphabet. I don't know if everybody knows that. Russian, Cyrillic, totally different alphabet. My name, if you write it, because I audited that class in college for a bit until I realized that 8 a.m. suck. My name looks like P, A without the line, C, C, L. That's Russell. It looks like Packle. P upside down, vehicle. Vehicle, fecal. Maybe the Russians are trying to tell me I'm a piece of crap. I don't know. But yeah, it's totally different. Entirely different. Now, I want to get to the one question from before, though, about Konecny. So Jim Jackson goes on Hunter Brody's podcast, or on WIP. I think it was on Hunter Brody's show. They have this conversation about Konecny, and Jim Jackson says, well, I'll tell you what, Hunter. I've been told that Travis Konecny could be looking for $10 million, and he scores! And then that became a pretty viral clip. It was going around. Flyers Twitter lit itself on fire again. If you've been paying attention to Snow the Goalie for the last few months, you know that that was the ask. That has been on the radar since the trade deadline, that his ask was going to be around $10 million. Obviously, when you're negotiating, you come in high, the team comes in low, you try to find middle ground. And we have litigated this many times on the show, and I guarantee we're going to litigate it again. Because from what I've heard, the Flyers and Konecny's camp are closer now than they have been at any point. But the ask is still around $9 million. They might settle on $9 million. Is $9 million a good way to spend your money right now? I don't think so. I truly don't. I like Travis Konecny. I'll tell you this. When I used to go down in the locker room, I loved the time that we would interact with Travis Konecny. There was a certain media member who's not around anymore. I think this media member, like, sometimes is around the team occasionally, but I don't think they're there as much. And we would maybe note the fact that this person really would make weird faces whenever the players would talk. And it was something that like players in the locker room talked about that this media member had. Anyway, but he would really laugh with us because of scrum lurkers, because in the on TSN, Jay and Dan would do the scrum lurkers segment, and Ant and I had been on scrum lurkers a few times. And so that was a joke that we would have with Konecny, that we were the scrum lurkers, right? We were behind the player and they would zoom in on us and it was fine. I like Travis Konecny. I think he's a good guy. He's got young kids. I want him to get a good contract. I do. On a human level, I want him to get a good contract. He's been here on some really bad teams, and he kind of embodies what you want a Flyers player to be. I don't want him to get some shitty deal. I do want Travis Konecny to get every dollar that he possibly can. And at the same time, as somebody who wants to see the Flyers like not be stuck in hockey purgatory like they have been for most of my adult life, actually most of my life, let's just call it most of my life, 33 years of life here. There haven't been a lot of good Flyers seasons. There haven't been a lot of great Flyers seasons. There haven't been really any great long-term cup contending teams in my 33 years of life. And if you're going to hold something from like the early 90s or something, like somewhere in the 90s, I don't remember much, guys. Like I was a little kid. Okay. So I don't have these like formative moments and these core memories of like Eric Lindros being the best player in the National Hockey League. I don't really remember that all that much. Okay. So apologies. But the Flyers haven't been some kind of real cup contender for an extended period of time. So, forgive me if I sound like a hypocrite. I want the player to get every dollar he can. And at the same time, I want the team to realize that you can't pay a guy who doesn't break 70 points, a guy who like really is probably at best a 30-goal scorer. You can't give that guy $9 million plus. I don't give a shit that the cap's going up. That's not a good way to invest your money. He's not 22. He's not 23. I think he's 28? 29, I think? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. By the time the Flyers are actually ready to be a good team or potentially be a cup contending team, he's going to be into his 30s. He's going to be my age. He is about the same size as me. Granted, not flabby. All right, there's some dad bondage here that he doesn't have. But like there is no chance that at like 33 at his size, he's going to be a dominant player. I don't think he has another level or two to get to. 10 million is absurd. 9 million I think is too much. 8 million is about where I'd say, that's fine. 8 million, you can figure it out. The only reason that you go to 9, by the way, is if there's not a no movement clause. Because ultimately what you have to allow yourself as the Flyers is there are other teams who would look at Travis Konecny around $9 million and say, yeah, we'll trade for that contract. As the cap keeps going up, yes, it is possible that in 2 years, he hits his age 30 season. The Flyers are getting closer to flipping into being a cup contender or heading that way. But it's clear that his timeline and theirs aren't lined up. Travis Konecny at $9 million 2 years from now on the trade market might be totally fine. But it won't change the fact that he doesn't have a 40-goal season to get to. He's not going to get to be a 50-goal scorer, right? So, like, it's not going to work. And I do think that they're going to sign him. I do. And I think that the number is going to come in around 9. And I think that a lot of people are going to be upset about it. I really do. And I don't blame them. And all of you who are out there right now who are frantically typing in the comments section, who I love and appreciate, you're right. $9 million plus for Travis Konecny is insane. But that's where this thing is heading. I don't think he's going to get 9.5. I don't think the 9.75 is in play anymore. I do think it's going to settle around 9. Now, if he comes in, if they sign him to like 6 years, 8.5, 8.75, I think you could sell that to the fan base. I do. I think at that point, at that number, at that term, you could sell it to the fan base as he's been everything we expect him to be. He's got an A on the sweater. He's an integral part of our locker room. He's been our best player. He's our top scorer. We need to have him. But at the same time, and what makes it really tricky is that Matvei Michkov is here. And if Michkov is going to be the guy that you expect him to be, he's going to have to play top-line minutes. He's going to probably have to play with Sean Couturier. Which means that automatically, you're going to now have the $9 million man in Travis Konecny on the second line. Somebody has to explain to me how that's going to work. Optically, how do you make that work? you're going to potentially overpay a guy and then put him on the second line. Or you're going to bring Mishkov over and you're going to put him on the second line with Morgan Frost, who the coach really doesn't enjoy having in the lineup, or Scott Lawton, who should have been traded 3 times by now. It's a really tricky situation they're in. We'll dive more into this at some point, but I didn't expect for the whole show to become so Flyers dominant here, but here we are today. There are other things, but Jay's right. You can't pay your second line right wing that. And that is what he'll be when they're ready to contend, for sure. M. Bodine says he's 27. What did I say, 28 or 29? All right, I was off on my math. My apologies. 27, though. 5 years from now, hitting 32, your body starts to creak a little bit. Just a little bit. William Gordon says if Konecny had better players around him, he'd have better numbers. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not saying that he's a good numbers on a bad team guy, but I don't know how much better he is on a good team. Like, Boston's not trading for Travis Konecny and putting him on the top line, right? Does it help a guy potentially to be on a team with better players? Yeah, but I still don't see a 40-goal scorer, consistent 40-goal scorer. He might, at some point in a 7-year contract, have a year where he gets to 40, but I don't think there's like 2 levels left. I don't think you're going to see him become a goal scorer like Sam Reinhart was this year, which is the one I keep going back to as like, optically, how do you give him more money, potentially, than Sam Reinhart got? Anyway, CT Landry over on X says, signing Konecny to that contract, please don't tell us it's a rebuild, because it's not. And I think that is a totally fair point. And I think that this organization is going to find that the amount of leeway they were given a season ago isn't going to be there this year. You got to do one of 2 things. You've either got to really signal to the fan base that this is a tear down within reason, and that it is a legit rebuild. We are not looking to add anyone of value. Torts is going to do what he's going to do, but he's going to play a lot of his younger guys, and it is a rebuild. You have to signal that to the fan base. But if you start signing guys to above market value contracts, to guys who have not been on good teams and ultimately who aren't top line players, you're going to catch the ire of the fan base. They benefited last year. They didn't really get much of it. This year is going to be different. Kenny Powers Mullet says Konecny should be traded, 100% traded at the deadline. The ask of $10 million is ridiculous. Settling at 8 or 9 is still too much. Good player on a bad team, but not an 8, 9, or $10 million player. Again, I think if they could come in around 8, 8.5, there's a way to sell it, and that ultimately the contract will be tradable. They can't give him $9 million and a no movement clause. There's no way. I mean, they might, but they shouldn't. They should not. Should not. I'm seeing a lot of other comments here that are similar. And Joe Papel is saying, can't risk an injury prior to the deadline. Now is his highest value. I think that the highest value is before the draft. I think that if you were going to do something, it was going to be before the draft. Is it possible that next trade deadline they could get a first-round pick for Travis Konecny for the 2025 draft where you already have 3 other first-round picks? Maybe. Like, next year's draft is really good, which is why I'm like, please, just be bad next year. Like, make next year the year that you really do try to gun for a top 3 pick. Maybe. CT says that a bad contract is a bad contract. They never age well. Sanheim's contract, Ristolainen's contract, Jay Grebe brings up when Chuck Fletcher signed Kevin Hayes. Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. All right. I think we're okay to move on from the Flyers. Oh, this is another one, though. Kenny Powers Mullet brings up the quote. I think it was Torts is the one who said this. Don't fall in love with your players. Signing him to that deal 100% goes against that, just like holding on to Lawton. I agree. I think there was a lot of speaking out of both sides of the mouth last year. And I think it was ultimately because the coach wanted to make the playoffs. The organization fell in love with the idea of making the playoffs. And they weren't going to just start pulling guys out of the lineup for the sake of trying to miss them. It just so happened that after we went culture, the bottom fell out. And there were some injuries, and they traded Sean Walker, but like didn't go the way that you wanted it to. Still ended up in hockey purgatory for the draft, and well, we've litigated that. Jay asks when the next know the goalie is. I have no idea. I don't know. I texted Bundy and Ant yesterday. We talked about potentially doing one today. Maybe it'll happen. I don't know. Our schedules in the summer are kind of a mess. Ant's got something going on around work that he texted me about that might take him out of town for a little bit. And if it happens, I'm going to troll the hell out of him if what he told me might happen. We'll be back. Snow the Goalie will be back. There's nothing wrong with it. We're totally fine. It's just the summer, we all kind of hit this wall. We're a little bit flyered out when we get into the summer. And then it's like we don't have to try to create conversation around the team. There are other shows that do. This is one of those times. I'll give a tip of the cap to the guys at PHLY. I will tip the cap to Charlie and Bill. I don't know how they do a daily show. I will tip my cap to Mertitas. I don't know how they do a daily show. Truly. Like I would lose my mind. That's part of why I'm doing this show, is that like I can jump around to the other teams. I don't know how I don't get it. So kudos to them. Seriously, kudos to them. Andrew asks how the wedding prep is going. Have I started doing my efficient stuff for Ant's wedding? No, I have not. And it's getting closer. We're a few months out. Pray for me. I'm concerned. All right. Let's move on. We're done with the Flyers. That took so much more time than I expected. So we're going to try to go through a little bit of a speed round now. Rumor comes out this week that New Jersey just can't let it go. New Jersey just won't let the dream die about bringing the Philadelphia 76ers across the bridge to Camden. Leave the team alone. New Jersey, you have the beach. We don't have that. Pennsylvania doesn't have a beach. You have a beach. You have many beaches. You have beaches that people are like oddly in love with, despite the fact that like in many cases the beaches aren't that nice. Fine. I get into this argument all the time with a certain somebody who used to own a site that I did a podcast with and occasionally write for, and definitely did write for a time, who bought a multi-million-dollar house down at one of the Jersey shores, tells me how great the shore is. And I'm like, there are better places to go. Just in fairness, there are better places to go. I like going down for like a weekend. It's fine. I wouldn't buy a house there. That's just me. I'm going to like trigger half the people watching the show now, okay? Jersey beaches are fine. I will go to Outer Banks for a week any day. Ocean's better. It's not congested. I don't have to worry about half the dumb shit that's happening at the boardwalk these days. Like, it's fine. I'll drive the 6 hours. We're cool. I'd rather spend my money, honestly, the same money that I'd spend on renting an overpriced Jersey Shore house. I'd rather just go to the Caribbean and have it all inclusive and have all my food and drinks and not have to go anywhere and just be able to relax. That's just me. There's no comparison. Ford says Outer Banks is definitely better. Thank you, Ford. You're a wonderful person. I've never said anything negative about you. Nico says Delaware beaches are the best. Andrew says the ocean's warmer in Outer Banks. Call me an elitist. If I'm going to go to a beach, I want to go to a beach that I enjoy. I want to go to a beach that I have fun. I want to go to a beach that's not overcrowded, that doesn't feel like the YMCA pool like 2 years ago. I don't need that. I want to be able to turn without bumping into somebody. Call me crazy. Maybe I am. How the hell did I get there? Camden. That's how. I can't stand the fact, can't stand it, that Camden, that New Jersey, are trying to get the Sixers back across the bridge. You can't have them. Okay? It's dumb. But it's out there because apparently Jersey's willing to put together a package, a support package for the team, because the team continues to run into issues with 76 Place, with the downtown arena, with issues with people arguing about Chinatown, with people arguing about public transit, about traffic, about are people actually going to want to bring businesses into that area? What about all the days that the building is left vacant without concerts? It's interesting. If you go back, I think it was last year, when we interviewed Hilferty on Snow the Goalie, and I know that Kincaid interviewed Hilferty on Crossing Broadcast a couple weeks ago. If you haven't watched that, it's a worthwhile watch. They talked about how many dates Wells Fargo Center is used between the Sixers and the Flyers and concerts, and how it's almost, I don't want to say never, but it's not usually a building that goes without an event. Like, you don't have 100 days out of the year that Wells Fargo Center is vacant. That's not what happens. That downtown arena will have one team. If the day ever comes that a WNBA team moves into Philly, you would have two teams. If you're a concert venue, or if you're a musician, right, and you have all the trucks that come with a massive production, right? You do a concert at Wells Fargo Center, you do a concert at the Link or at Citizens Bank Park, you have copious amounts of space because there are just parking lots galore. You go to the downtown arena, where the hell does all that go? I'm talking about traffic. Imagine T Swift goes to play 76 Place, which she wouldn't because she's a stadium lady, because she's that good and has that huge of a following. But just conceptually, she wants to go do a concert at 76 Place. Are you going to have like 10 semis plus what you would expect is kind of like that luxury trailer setup or whatever that a lot of stars like to use that feels like a home away from home? Are they gonna park that on Market Street? No. Stop. Just no way. I love this. Bodine says, I played at City Winery last year. It was crazy just getting 6 cars in there. That's the thing that, like, man, of all the things that are potentially problematic about the Sixers arena, the logistics of it just don't make sense. And I have no problem with the Sixers, by the way, having an arena downtown. I don't care. Not my money, not my problem. And in theory, if you could get a lot of businesses in there, it would certainly be nice. But if the building is going to sit vacant for 200 days out of the year, 200 plus days of the year, that doesn't work. That can never work. You're not going to fix any of the proposed issues of like helping to fix crime because there's going to be a lot of foot traffic and there's going to be like a reason for people to be in that area for good reasons. Like that won't work. All right, so let's take that part out, okay? Joe Papel asks, by the way, the vacant nights argument makes some sense, but then how does the Link survive over the 300 open dates? It's a good question. It's the same way that any football stadium that's an outdoor stadium and that Citizens Bank Park does. Citizens Bank Park has a ton of ticket revenue because they have 81 home games plus any potential postseason games. The Link, they get to make just absurd amounts of money on season ticket holders. They have enough concerts that go through. They're ultimately outdoor stadiums, and they happen to also be located on the sports complex. Would that work if the Link were downtown? Maybe not, but that's part of the beauty of them being in the area that they are. I really do think that that's a lot of it. So anyway, New Jersey apparently wants to take the Sixers. And they're offering Sixers ownership, apparently, a nice financial package to do so. The Sixers, to this point, have said they have no intention of moving the team. David Edelman has said on the record they will not move the Sixers out of Philadelphia. If 76 Place continues to hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, and their only options are to remain a tenant at Wells Fargo Center or to go build in Camden, it's going to be a conversation. It has to be. But at the same time, you're going to lose a lot of fan support. It's not that driving across the bridge to Camden is really like a difficult thing to do, right? It's not like they're moving the team to Washington, D.C. It's not like they're moving the team to Pittsburgh, right? Like, that's not what's happening. It's not a difficult drive. It's just it's the principle of the thing. Like, if you're a Philly team, you're based in Philly, unless you're the Union. But you're based in Philly. It's not like what happens with Washington teams where they play in Virginia or whatever. It's not like the New York teams where the Giants and the Jets and Red Bull, they all play in New Jersey. Philadelphians take pride in their teams being in Philadelphia. And if Sixers ownership ultimately decides that they can't get their downtown arena and they don't want to remain tenant, and what they ultimately want is the highest ROI, and the way that you get the highest ROI is to have a stadium or an arena to sell as well. If they sell out and they take this team across the bridge to Camden, just so that in 10 years from now, they can get more money when they go to sell the team along with an arena, they will have cratered support for the team. People will still love the players. They will still actively root for Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey and Paul George. They will still cheer for Nick Nurse and acknowledge that he is a better coach than Doc Rivers ever was. But they will hate ownership. And it will resonate in a way that I don't think ownership would be ready for. So again, if the Sixers want that downtown arena and they're going to force the issue and it's going to happen, by all means, best of luck in your endeavors. Don't take the team across the bridge to Camden. It's just dumb. Jillian's here. Jillian weighs in and says, and we like to make fun of North Jersey energy drinks. Red Bull. The pink cows. All right, so the Sixers are off the table. We're done with them. Since Jillian was here, Jillian, I think, found this show because of union talk. I have a very quick point to make. You may or may not have seen this, but the Philadelphia Union, they set a record. Now, it's not a record that really means anything. But the Philadelphia Union set a record over the weekend because Cavan Sullivan made his debut with the Philadelphia Union. And if you're sitting back and saying, who the hell is Cavan Sullivan? Don't feel bad. You wouldn't be alone. Cavan Sullivan became the youngest player in the history of any major North American sports league to play in the top league. 14 years, 293 days old. He breaks the previous record of Freddie Adu. It made national news. There was a whole thing about it on the Today Show. It lit up Twitter for a bit. Some of the national news outlets, the ESPNs and the Foxes of the world, they did a whole big thing about it. It was a really impressive moment. Except it really wasn't. Like it was on a human level for Cavan Sullivan, and we wish him all the best here at the Russ Joy Show. But it's really not that big of a deal. I'm going to show you why, because, we are fair and balanced here at the Russ Joy Show. I'm going to pop this on the screen. It's a graphic that Major League Soccer put out. Youngest players to ever play and debut across a major sports team in the United States. Cavan Sullivan gets beyond Freddie Adu, Melanie Barcenas, Andrew Bynum, Patrick Marleau, and the list goes on and on. 14 years, 293 days. Also a nice tip there, tip of the cap, by Major League Soccer to put the women's leagues on there as well. Cavan Sullivan didn't play because he's one of the best players for the Philadelphia Union. He didn't make his debut because he has been viewed as the next generational talent like Freddie Adu was back in the day. Cavan Sullivan broke into the lineup because the Philadelphia Union ownership wanted to take some heat off themselves. Because all the week leading up to it and the previous weekend, all that anyone who cared about the Union were talking about was taking away the signs, the sell the team signs, the sugar ain't sweet no more, about telling people they couldn't wear the sell the team shirts into the stadium, about the Sons of Ben putting out their bullshit statement. All of that happened leading up into last weekend. So the Union likely sat back and said, how do we get the narrative back in our favor? And what they chose to do was bring this kid on who is a good prospect for them, who is a good player, is a good academy player, and is somebody who, like, in theory, would have been great to build around for a long time potentially, except that they've already sold off his rights to Manchester City in the EPL. He's just too young right now to be able to go play for them. So he's here. And he's a good player. But he's not a generational talent. He's not ready right now to be an impact player or a difference maker for a Philadelphia Union team that went from an MLS Cup a couple of years ago to probably missing the playoffs this year. That's not what this is. See through it. Be real. Come on. Joe Papel, I don't even know if Joe even watches the Union. Says seems like more of a PR gimmick to me to deflect attention. Bingo. Bango. Bongo. 100%. Sean C. says, when's the last time they sent a player to the press room for a post-game presser? Can't recall it recently. It's like putting a new paint job on a junker. Too many fans have taken the bait. It worked. It did. Cavan Sullivan getting into a game got enough people to feel like, all right, the Union they're doing the right thing. When the Sons of Ben put out that statement about reinforcements are coming, they must have been talking about Cavan Sullivan. Certainly couldn't have been the striker that they just got, who was in and out of the lineup elsewhere at MLS. That better not be your reinforcements. But anyway. Jillian says, it was cool. It was a cool, nice moment for everyone. I was more excited about Ty Barabo getting a hat trick and the Union finally getting a win. The win is nice. It kills my idea, though, of the extra minute for every loss that the Union has in a row. So that is now off the table. Dave Quinn agrees with Jillian, though. They needed that win. Sean C. also says, adding to the fact that Curtin just let it slip that they tried to get him to Toronto just days after the Union were taking protest banners. Yeah, that's he let that slip in the post-game presser, which is kind of a problem. It certainly would make you feel as though they were trying to do the immediate deflection. They didn't want it to run a news cycle for a full week. Anyway, good for him. Again, from the player perspective, we 100% at the Russ Joy Show, me, I, and all the people watching across all the platforms, we wish him the best in his career. But that was a PR stunt, without question. That's it. Let's keep it in soccer for a second because there are a couple of other things, and then we have one non-sports point to get to, and then we're going to call it a day because it's been a long episode. But it is a Friday episode, and you have the whole weekend to listen to. You can listen to it in chunks. We talked about the fact that the U.S. men's national team have a number of potential interested parties, and they had gone after, at least gauged interest from Jurgen Klopp, who said 9. Said that he wasn't interested. He's taking at least a year away from soccer. I still hold out hope that he changes his mind. I don't think U.S. soccer really did want him. I think they wanted to be able to say that they talked to him. Okay, fine. De La Fuente, the coach of Spain, the rumor came out that the Friday leading up to the Euro final, that his agents and representation had reached out to U.S. soccer about him having interest. Many viewed that as a potential power play, as a potential play for negotiating leverage to get more money out of the Spanish Federation. Not a lot has come out about him since. We know that Wilfred Nancy has been a name that was rumored. Steve Cherundolo was a name that had been rumored. Gareth Southgate, by quote-unquote mutual decision or whatever, left England. His name had been thrown out before. But then the report came out yesterday. Oh, and Pochettino's name had also come out as potentially being of interest to the U.S. and to England. And he managed, obviously, in the EPL. It could make a lot of sense for him to go there. Fine. But then a name came out yesterday, and the reaction, I think, has been largely mixed. So Patrick Vieira, who won a World Cup as a player, who managed in the U.S., most notably, I guess we'd say most notably for NYCFC, who was the manager at Strasbourg abroad, his contract, by mutual agreement, was terminated with Strasbourg. And then the rumor came out yesterday that his contract had been mutually terminated because he was in active negotiations for the U.S. men's national team job. Does Patrick Vieira move the needle for U.S. soccer fans? Is his name big enough that he's going to get casual fans to care about soccer? No. Is he a guy who's going to inspire a ton of optimism because of his success as a coach? Certainly not. Is he still better than Greg Berhalter? Yes. Am I thrilled about the idea of Patrick Vieira being the men's national team coach? Not really. Jose Mourinho's contract runs out, like there's an opt-out in his contract in January. I would much rather know that we're going to have some interim coaches in place for the next few months, but Jose Mourinho is going to come and lead the U.S. into a World Cup cycle, because I think that having name recognition and having success and having won actual trophies and having a really good tactical mind would probably be more beneficial to the U.S. men's national team. That's what I would like to see happen. That's the guy that I would like to see them go after. It seems like any interest that they had in Hervé Renard might have ended. Maybe his asking price was too high. I really don't know. But his name was a hot name for a while, and it seemed to die off. I guess if you had to ask me, do I think that Patrick Vieira is a better manager or it would inspire more confidence than Steve Cherundolo? Yes. Yes, he would. And to Sam's point over on YouTube, Vieira has the cachet to be able to hold players accountable because he won a World Cup. More important for this group than tactics or installing a new system, Henry would be the same if they could get Thierry Henry. No idea if that'll happen. I don't know if Thierry Henry is even interested in a managerial position, especially of a national team. Maybe. Dave Quinn is smart, though. Says they need to go bigger than Vieira. Also, I am better than Greg. So the bar is pretty low. That's fair. I'll be interested to see. Like, maybe by Tuesday, they'll name a coach. And we can talk about it. Because as we've kind of done, like, we'll talk about it on the show. I like to monitor what's happening with the U.S. men's national team. Now, in fairness, when they start playing friendlies and everything, like, I'm probably not going to be breaking down every game as it happens, but I like to follow these things from a macro view. And right now, U.S. soccer has the potential, and it seems like they have the interest of a lot of top names. You have to get somebody. Listen, the fact that Pochettino's name was even in the mix, that Klopp's name was even remotely in the mix, that De La Fuente, even if it was a negotiating tactic, would have let it known that he was interested in the U.S. job, that Mourinho maybe could be in play. That wouldn't have happened 4 years ago. That wouldn't have happened 2 years ago. But as I said way back when about Klopp, there is a legitimate draw to potentially being the manager of the home squad in a World Cup. It's not an unprecedented opportunity, but it's pretty damn close. And I fully expect that if they don't name a manager in the next week, if this drags on for another month or two, you're going to see other top names that are going to get bantied about. And ultimately, I hope they get one. It is so important in that next World Cup cycle to bring in the casual fan, give people a name they can believe in or that they can look up and that they can have a better understanding for. Bring somebody in who does have cachet. Vieira has more cachet, I think, as a player than as a manager. Bring somebody in who can hold these players accountable. There were a lot of rumors that came out. We didn't break them down here. I'm not going to do it today, but a lot of rumors about how certain guys were left off the roster because potentially they upset some of the players on the team, even though they would have been a better player, a better option for this team than some of the guys that they went into the Copa with. You can't have the inmates running the asylum. That seemed to be what was happening with Greg Berhalter. We will see, depending on who they bring in, if that's going to be the case. Joe Papel says that Mourinho is like the football version of Torts. Loses the locker room quickly. The good news is, you only have 2 years until the World Cup. All right, we're going to get to the last thing. This is the part of the show where we venture into very strange territory, unprecedented territory. We're going to just have a really brief moment to talk about what's going on in the world because I find it interesting. And as I said at the top of the show, a political show. I genuinely don't really care about either political party. I find myself in this weird place where it feels like many of the people that I am around in my life also seem to identify this weird middle ground where we say, stop being psychotic to this side and stop being psychotic to this side. And then the people on this side and the people on this side like to scream at each other that the other side is psychotic and they're the totally rational people. Meanwhile, it's just like watching arrows go over top, just back and forth. Well, anyway, I'm in this like weird middle ground. But I find myself, and I also think that a lot of people generally don't care about politics in this country until an election cycle picks up. Sometimes, and it's usually around presidential elections, right? And typically around where the primaries happen, you get people who get interested. Because if you identify as a Republican or as a Democrat, you care about who your party is going to put up. Because ultimately, if you are firmly entrenched in either camp, you want to see your team win. And that's what American politics are. It's team, team, team. It's unlike what you see in different parts of Europe, where you can have 10 different political parties, 7 different political parties represented in a parliament like you would see in Germany. You don't get that here, which honestly is kind of sad. I will admit, I think it's kind of sad that we have allowed over the years for our country to fall into a duopoly that would rather have debates between this team and that team. I don't particularly enjoy it. I just don't think it's a great thing. I wouldn't want to see just two teams in a sports league. Why would I want just two people to pick from in an election? Okay, fine. So I'm one of these people who gets really excited when we get around this time of year because I'm fascinated to see how polls are going to move. And because I'm not tied to either side, I'm just interested to watch the kind of chaos unfold, because you start to see how a poll will affect one candidate and their numbers rise and they start to all of a sudden be really confident, their numbers fall, and it starts to be, oh, the polls don't really matter. We had a lot happen in the last week. There was an attempted assassination attempt. Very bad, very sad. People very upset about what that means just in general for democracy. Not great. Not a good thing. There were people who celebrated it who I think are psychotic and need help. There are also people who are like saying that this is like proof of divine intervention and that like this person is like the second coming of Jesus. I don't buy that either. But I think most rational people said that is bad in general. Nobody wants to see that. Okay, fine. But what has come out since is that what had been perceived as a very bad month or so for Joe Biden since the first presidential debate had gotten worse, and that an assassination attempt historically sends the person who was nearly assassinated's number through the roof and almost makes it a foregone conclusion they're going to win an election. So I was interested to see how it was going to play out, how the polling was going to play out. And more than anything, I was interested to see, would all of the thoughts of potentially replacing a candidate happen? Could it happen? Like, I know, even though I find myself in this, wonderful middle zone, I know people who are pretty far on this side and pretty far on that side. And sometimes the things they say I think are kind of unhinged and crazy, where they're like, well, it's very clear that the Republicans are going to have to replace Trump because he's a felon. And then on the other side, I get, well, it's very clear that the Democrats are going to have to replace Joe Biden because he's old and he's got dementia. And I'm like, all right, well, let's just find somewhere in the middle. Is it possible? Both of these guys are old. One had some legal issues in court. The other, after a debate, looked significantly more aged, we'll say, than the other. I still stand in the middle and say, I don't think either are particularly impressive all the time. And I think that, like, as a democracy, we probably should have been able to figure out a way to get some other people in, some new people in. Whatever, I digress. But the thing that was interesting is, in the last couple of days, the belief that was once apparently a very fringe conspiracy that Democrats might replace Joe Biden became more real. And that instead of it being a conspiracy and a ridiculous thought that had been thrown out, that it might actually happen. And so if you watch the news, whichever station you watch, because it now seems as though the media have all kind of come around to the same idea. Yesterday, the news broke that potentially, it was Mark Halpern is the one, he was on The Circus on Showtime, at least early on. I don't know, I stopped watching after the second season. They put out the idea that Joe Biden could be done, like end his campaign, remain president, but could end his campaign as early as Sunday, that a speech had already been drafted, and that pressure from the party itself, from Nancy Pelosi, from Chuck Schumer, from all those people, might have actually led to him saying, all right, it's time to be done. But what got really interesting is the thing that everybody who's ever taken a course in high school or in college around politics has, I think, kind of always wanted to see. And if you're my age, I don't think we've ever been able to see something like it. So I find it fascinating, which is why it's part of today's show, is the idea of an open convention. The idea that you went through an entire cycle, an entire primary cycle as a party. There was really no significant challenger, because typically you don't have a lot of real challengers to an incumbent, in fairness. And that one party kind of pushed their guy along because he was the incumbent. There was no real challenge. Dean Phillips doesn't count. And that it's possible that at some point in the not too distant future, an entire political party, millions and millions of people who placed a vote for this person because they really were the only option, or maybe because they did believe in him, that they're going to be totally rendered useless. Like, if I were somebody who voted for either of these people who are on the ticket as of right now, or on the pending ticket, well, they both accepted the nomination. So they're both on the ticket. if I were somebody who voted for either of these people, and again, apolitical here, so I'm playing if I were one of those people, and then I found out that millions of people voted for this person or this person, and then at a convention, people are going to undo that. They're going to change the whole thing, and they're going to put in their own person. I might be upset. I think that ultimately what's going to happen is it's going to make for great TV, because that report by Mark Halpern was that not only is Joe Biden apparently going to drop out, but that he's not going to endorse Kamala Harris, that all the money that would have transferred directly to her, because they're on the ticket together, might not actually transfer because he might not back her. Now, she could still win if it goes to an open convention, but that like other governors, Congress people, they could all throw their hats in the ring. And what we would have would be one of the most interesting spectacles in like modern TV history. And as somebody who, again, is just watching all of this unfold and watching the insanity on both sides unfold, I am absolutely fascinated. And by the way, I don't think it's out of bounds to have this conversation. I see it in the comments. There's nobody saying shut up and stick to sports, so I appreciate that. But like, here we are in this weird spot where like there had been the thought, right? Democrats have thought for a while that Trump was going to either get sent away or that the legal, pressures were going to force him to step down and that they would have an open convention. But instead, it looks like Democrats might have an open convention. I have no idea how it's going to play out. I'm fascinated. I think a lot of people are genuinely fascinated and are starting to kind of scramble. All right, well, who could potentially run and all that? And I'm not going to break all that down now, right? Like that's not necessarily what this show is. But it's just merely from a human level, from watching what happened last weekend and what happened at the first debate, and watching the way that the conversation at the national level has changed so much. I'm fascinated. And this truly is something I've always wanted to see. The idea of an open convention, the idea that like there are people that are going to go out on the floor and they're going to have to make their pitch for why they should be the candidate. Delegates are going to vote. And apparently in that like potential stepping down, it's going to be like the delegates can vote. And if nobody gets over 50%, I think it is, then the super delegates get to vote. This is a perfect situation for anybody who's ever taught social studies. It is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. I have no idea how it's going to play out. I don't really care about the polling numbers. I don't really care about, like this person polls better against Trump than this person. Like, I don't care. I think ultimately, like, whatever. Somebody's going to be a nominee on both sides. People are going to go vote. They're going to go do their thing. And then we'll have a president. Democracy lives. Everybody's happy. Well, not everybody's happy. Like half the country's going to be happy with whoever gets elected and half whatever. But it's going to be interesting to watch. And I feel like, based on conversations I have with friends, like we're all kind of interested in watching it unfold. I'm going to go over to the comments really quick because I want to be careful here because I don't want it to, while I am a nice middle person here, I don't want to like start getting into like a lot of crazy stuff here or going one way or the other. But Joe Papel says that it's sad, has watched a lot of qualified people dismissed over the last 12 years with their power through the division in the country. Joe also thinks that they're two angry old men. Now, I will say Joe Papel is not an old man. Joe Papel is definitely older than I am. And to me, it's interesting that he says that. We have a lot of people going back and forth about like, I don't like this guy, I don't like that guy. Okay, fine. I might not go all to the comments here, but I will agree with this. Ford, I do think, is right. There should be more than two parties. I would love in my lifetime to see us get to a point where you have more than just two political parties. I don't know if it'll ever happen. And I agree. I think that the whole system's broken. Nico agrees. And it's funny, and Ford is actually right here too. The fact that Biden and Trump are the two best options, are the ones that were presented, is like a sad commentary, regardless of who we prefer. The thing that I'm always interested in with polling is that you will see people who say high unfavorability rating for both people. And yet those are the ones who got pushed up. One, because they're in the incumbent, and the other because, I mean, in fairness, Republicans didn't have anybody who was able to really go head to head with Trump. Trump wouldn't debate. And so you just had a bunch of people who were kind of bickering with each other, but nobody was a good enough door-to-door politician to be able to even like make it a case. Like DeSantis had been viewed as somebody who could actually like give Trump a run, might have had the backing of the establishment. he was a disaster. Like he, as a door-to-door politician, the clips that would come out of him, like going to diners or whatever and meeting people, he looked like a robot. He looked like an android. Like I knew nothing about the guy. I mean, like I knew some policy things, but I was like, this isn't going to work. And he would get dog walked in a debate. And there was never a point where it felt like they were going to replace Trump on that ticket. And obviously the Democrats were never going to replace Biden on the ticket. And now all of a sudden we're in this weird place. And I'm just interested. Truly interested. Sean C., this is, I think, where we'll end today. Too much gaslighting when it comes to voting for third parties. You get accused of throwing votes away and giving the bad guy a better chance to win. That is the problem with a two-party system. And I tend to agree with Sean that, like, if you could get a third-party candidate who got enough support, it would certainly be interesting. I will merely point out the fact, like, if you're a conspiracy theorist about the way that the parties work together, they abandoned the commission for debates, due in at least some part to, I think, RFK Jr. was getting close to the thresholds to be able to be on the debate stage, and that by the parties agreeing to abandon the commission and set their own thing up, they didn't have to let him debate. How you feel about RFK is up to you. I don't really care, but how you feel about it. He has enough of a percentage right now that if he were to back out and endorse one or the other, could really swing the election if polling's to be believed. The parties decided that they care more about maintaining the duopoly than they do about potentially doing what's best for the American electorate. And we'll leave it there. I'm interested to know. Let me know in the comments who you think. Like, will it happen? Will we have an open convention? And if so, who's going to win? What's the ticket going to be in the fall? The reason that it's actually kind of important, I guess, if you're a Pennsylvanian, by the way, is that the governor, Josh Shapiro, his name has been bantered about a lot. It doesn't look like, if all the reports are to be believed, it doesn't look like he would try to be the top of the ticket. I think, truly, if I'm being honest, I think that his thought was 2028. But it doesn't look like he's going to be top of the ticket guy. But could he potentially be a VP candidate? Could Kamala Harris go into an open convention and say he's going to be my VP? If so, it'd be a very popular choice. Then Pennsylvania needs a governor. It'll be very interesting. That's all I'm saying. It's interesting. So there's your interesting little note for the day. So the show went very long today. I hope that you enjoyed it. I saw some nice things over in the comments. Thank you to Joe for saying great show. Big thank you to everybody who joined live on YouTube, X, and Facebook. A big thank you to everybody who listens in the podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back on Tuesday, 8 a.m. We'll do the show live. Do me a favor in the meantime. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. That seriously is critical. Hit that like button. If you don't have a YouTube account, hit that like button. Like the video, share the video, subscribe, and do me a favor this weekend. Share this episode, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube or wherever. Share the video or share the episode, the podcast episode, with like 2 people in your life. If we do that, well, the show will continue to grow. I appreciate all of you so much. I hope all of you have a great weekend. I hope your weekend is fantastic. I will talk to many of you on Crossing Broadcast on Monday. I will talk to even more of you here on the Russ Joy Show on Tuesday. And at some point, Snow the Goalie may drop an episode, so keep your eyes peeled and go subscribe over there if you haven't done so already. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. We'll talk to you very soon.